Thanks to my friend and colleague Reg Helwer, the Minister of Central Services, for joining us here today. COVID pandemic has been the most disruptive event of our lifetimes, I would say. Our lives and livelihoods have been upended and transformed beyond what any of us could have possibly imagined. We've all had to adapt to this new reality, and that has meant, for many of us, learning a new way of life, a virtual way of life. Throughout the pandemic, Manitobans have met on Teams, they've attended school through Zoom, they've connected on Skype, we've visited our families via FaceTime, we've logged on to more virtual meetings than our schedules ever prepared us for. We've met virtually, we've shopped virtually, we've exercised virtually, we've marked the holidays virtually, we've tuned into hundreds of virtual news conferences like this one today. You name it, we've gone virtual. And we did this to stay safe. But staying safe at home should not mean staying isolated in your home. All of us have yearned to stay connected with family and friends near and far, with world events shaping and shaking our very lives. So being connected and living virtually are no longer choices. They're necessities. They're a way of life in 2021. This virtual transformation's reinforced how important it is to be able to connect with one another and stay safe in doing so. Two of the most important things governments can do are to protect Manitobans and to advance Manitobans' opportunities, building infrastructure. Not just the concrete infrastructure of highways, roads, and bridges, which we have committed to doing significantly more to invest in, but the knowledge infrastructure of fiber and connectivity as well. This pandemic has reinforced that the virtual reality many of us now take for granted remains a virtual dream for far too many of our fellow Manitobans. Our government believes that your future success should not depend on where you live in Manitoba. We believe in equal opportunity for all. And that's what today's announcement is about. Too many Manitobans, more than in any other part of the country, are deprived of the opportunity of reliable internet cell service. In particular, our rural and northern communities. In particular, our Indigenous communities. We'll advance as a province only when we advance our knowledge infrastructure that allows everyone to join in that progress. So today, our government is announcing an historic partnership in connecting all of Manitoba with one another and with the world. Our government's pleased to announce today an agreement with Xplornet, one of Canada's leading broadband service providers, to provide more than 125,000 unserved or underserved Manitobans, representing nearly 30 First Nations and 270 rural and northern communities with reliable, high-speed internet services. Additionally, this agreement will also serve 350 communities with cell phone access. For more details on this exciting announcement, I am genuinely excited to pass it over to my colleague, Reg Helwer. Over to you, Reg.
Thank you, Premier. It is indeed an honor to be with you here today as we take an important step toward building connectivity in our province. Currently, there are a significant number of communities in Manitoba's rural, remote, and Indigenous areas that are largely underserved by high-speed, competitive, and reliable telecommunications. This creates a telecommunication gap. Federal estimates indicate there are approximately 130,000 addresses in Manitoba which are either unserved or underserved. Through Manitoba Hydro, the province owns thousands of kilometers of fiber optic cable across the province. The network was created to communicate with northern hydroelectric facilities and transmit data. However, much of it has never been used. It was paid for by Manitobans, but it's sitting unused with no immediate plans for use in the future. Manitoba issued a request for qualifications, an RFQ, in 2019 to seek carriers and other providers who could use the existing infrastructure to make services available in communities across rural and northern Manitoba. In July 2020, Manitoba issued a request for proposals, an RFP, indicating that Manitoba intends to work with one or more existing shortlisted proponents that will best improve broadband connectivity in Manitoba. The entire competitive process was overseen by a third-party fairness monitor to ensure equitability and fairness. As a result, Manitoba is entering into a non-binding Memorandum of Understanding, or MOU, with ExploreNet Communications, who was the successful proponent in an open and competitive process to use Manitoba Hydro's underutilized network. The ExploreNet agreement provides for the connection of over 125,000 more Manitoba homes with modern broadband access. As shown on the map behind us here, this addresses approximately 97% of the unserved and underserved areas of Manitoba. This agreement supports the closing of the telecommunications gap in Manitoba to benefit rural, remote, and Indigenous communities through improving access to broadband, and this will support further implementation of technologies that are capable of evolving to the next generation to keep pace with growing data needs, and also improving cellular service along long stretches of transportation corridors and in communities that are currently without cellular service. This poses a safety risk to Manitobans. It is expected that approximately 350 communities will benefit from this improved cellular service, with many having access to these cellular services for the very first time. ExploreNet has a commitment to work with First Nations communities through broadband connections, and also through working directly with First Nations-led businesses to implement additional connectivity in their communities. If nothing else, COVID-19 has underscored the importance of broadband connectivity and the need to ensure people across the province have access to critical information, such as distance learning or internet-based health services when they're working from home or studying from home. Thank you for being here today, and I'll now pass it back to the Premier. Premier?
Thanks very much, Minister, and congratulations to you and your department, too, for your honest hard work on this issue over a long period of time. It's a big deal. And it's a big deal for not just rural and northern Manitobans. It's a big deal for all of us who care about our friends and neighbors who live in rural and northern communities and want to see our province move forward. All of us are in this together. Granting access to reliable high-speed internet is going to advance the next generation in their educational and professional pursuits. When I was going to country school many years ago, we read every book in the library because there were only 40 or so books. And it was there were limits on rural kids in terms of their ability to get the information that they needed in a timely way. It's a big deal when we got World Book encyclopedias. Now the internet brings those and many, many more pieces of information. It's almost impossible to comprehend the degree to which you're limited in the absence of high-speed internet. So this is a big deal today. Improved cellular service, too, across northern and remote transportation corridors is going to make it safer for people, local people and those who transport goods and services to northern and rural communities to operate safely. Knowledge is power. The power to learn, the power to live your life your own way, the power to work remotely if you want to, from anywhere in our province, for the government or for anybody else. And most of all, knowledge is the key. It's the gateway to economic success and to social equality. That progress is what we're after today, and it brings this initiative today is going to help bring Manitobans, I think, closer together. It closes the gap. It starts to close the gap between urban and rural Manitobans, between northern and southern Manitobans, between Indigenous and non-Indigenous Manitobans too. Today's announcement of Internet for Everyone helps to put that greater access to knowledge in more hands than ever before and open more minds and more potential in Manitobans than has ever been opened with any other initiative that we've announced, I think, today is a big deal. Thank you. Look forward to your questions.
Thank you, Mr. Premier and Mr. Minister. A reminder to our reporters on the line, you will have one preliminary and one follow-up question. Up first this morning from the Winnipeg Free Press, Carol.
Good morning. Will other small internet service providers continue to have proper access to the network?
Well, we'll work with ExploreNet, and ExploreNet will be the entity that will work with those small providers, along with First Nations, to make sure that we can get broadband out to various communities.
My next question is for the Premier. Premier, what do you think of the Public Utilities Board ordering Manitoba Hydro to hand over financial information and forecasts within 30 days? What do you say to big industrial customers trying to make post-pandemic plans who are concerned about your government imposing rate hikes without any PUB oversight when Bill 35 is enacted?
Well, the rate hike, as you know, Carol, is significantly lower than what has been imposed in the past and is done on an interim basis only while the legislation is waiting to be passed. When the legislation's passed, all the concerns of industrial power users and I think of Manitobans in terms of strengthening the Public Utilities Board and making it more transparent and more accountable will be addressed. And so the interim steps we've taken are to make sure that we move in line with virtually every other jurisdiction in the country in terms of regular hearings that set rates for a longer period than 2 years, more like 5, because that gives greater assurance to not only industrial power users, but also to Manitobans as they're preparing their budgets. They'll be able to know what their hydro rates are going to be. So I think it's good. I have great respect for the Public Utilities Board. They were ignored in the past, as you know, by the previous government, who went ahead with a $10 billion investment without actually asking the Public Utilities Board for permission before they advanced it. I don't think that's the right way to go. So we're going to continue to respect the Public Utilities Board and strengthen it through our legislation.
From Global News, Anya.
Good morning. Would this announcement have happened without the pandemic, making it even more obvious how disconnected and underserved these communities are?
Yeah, I think to be fair, Reg, this was undertaken prior to the pandemic. Probably would have been announced sooner without the pandemic, not later. This has been a long-standing problem. I'll just, I'll tell you just by comparison. If you want to research it, any of you are interested, go to the CRTC website, Table 4-3, and you'll see a list of availability of internet services across the country. And you'll see in that list where Manitoba ranks. And Manitoba ranks last in most major categories. In terms of access in small population centers, we're dead last. In terms of rural access, we are dead last. We're less than half of the access that Alberta has to the west. We're a quarter of what Quebec provides. On First Nations reserves, we in Saskatchewan are the lowest. Saskatchewan's 7%. We're 2. In Alberta, almost 20% of First Nations reserves have access to high-speed internet. My point is that this present challenge that we have to face is very real. It's very large. It's very significant, and the opportunities to improve the equality of opportunity in rural and northern communities is very real as well. And the old system just wasn't working to address this issue, not effectively and not well.
Okay, and yesterday we reached 1,000 deaths due to COVID-19. Premier, do you have any comment on this milestone?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's a tragic day yesterday and also our birthday, and so the joy and sorrow we all feel with the tragic loss of so many Manitobans is, I think, only able to be addressed by thinking about the reality that we rose together as people to try to make sure we prevented even more deaths. And we have. Manitobans deserve a lot of credit for the way they've behaved throughout this pandemic, basically delaying the onset of the third wave better than anybody. We have, outside of the Atlantic bubble, we have, for example, year-to-date, 10,000 fewer cases of COVID than our neighbor Saskatchewan. And every other province has tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands, more cases than us. And that isn't to say we've done everything right, but we're facing an unprecedented challenge together, and we're doing the best we can, most of us. are doing very well. And now we have the challenge of getting vaccinated, following the public health rules, and shortening that third wave. And we must continue to do both those things as we move forward. Manitobans can do that. We've proven it, we've done it before, and we can do it again too.
From the Brandon Sun, Drew.
Thank you. Right now, are there any plans for the province to sell off the actual fiber optic network itself, or will the actual network remain publicly owned?
Reg?
So this is owned by Manitoba Hydro and owned by Manitobans. It is not for sale and will not be sold. It will be using a very small percentage of the fiber network that Manitoba Hydro has put in place. So it does remain owned by Manitoba Hydro and Manitobans.
Okay, thank you. And with this announcement today, will it help provide people in rural areas with alerts from the National Alert System, like for tornadoes and those types of natural disasters?
Well, when you have access to broadband and cell service, that does enable those types of things to happen more quickly, yes. So that will enable that once this network is put into place.
From the Winnipeg Sun, Josh.
Good afternoon, Minister Helwer and Premier. Why ExploreNet? They are a New Brunswick company. Were there Manitoba companies that were shortlisted? And what guarantees do Manitobans have to the quality of broadband service that they will receive through this agreement?
So ExploreNet has been in business since 2004, predominantly in Eastern Canada. They've been in Manitoba for many years and have purchased and partnered with companies in Manitoba. Their expertise is in rural and northern communities and Indigenous communities, and that's something that made them stand apart from others that bid on this process.
Okay. And Premier, I was wondering if you could respond to the CBC story this morning about yourself receiving amnesty on back taxes for your Costa Rica property. Why would you need or require amnesty of any kind on your back taxes in Costa Rica?
Well, I'm happy to answer any questions on taxes, Josh. I always have, I always will. Amnesty apparently was offered blanket. That means I didn't, I specifically want to assure Manitobans didn't ask for any special treatment, never would, never have. But I think it allows me to say that there are allegations that have come from within the NDP that Wab Canoe hasn't paid his taxes. In fact, for many years, he hasn't paid in full his taxes. And so I think at this point it would be fair for me to ask the question, if questions about my taxes are fair to ask, and I maintain they are, why not ask questions about Mr. Canoe's?
From CBC Manitoba, Bart.
Hello, Mr. Premier. Sorry, how specifically has Mr. Canoe not paid his taxes? Just to follow up on that.
Well, those are allegations that were made during the NDP leadership race by NDPers. I haven't seen any investigative questions being asked, so specifically I'm referencing the fact that I've always answered questions about my personal taxes. I have always paid my taxes when I became aware I had a bill, and it's alleged that Mr. Canoe has not, so I'm simply asking the question if it's fair to ask questions about my taxes and go back as far as 2008 in reference to them. Prior, by the way, half a decade prior to the time, or close to that I came back into provincial politics, why wouldn't questions be asked of Mr. Canoe about his? He hasn't given any evidence that he paid his taxes. I'm not suggesting he didn't, Bartley. I'm suggesting he hasn't given any evidence that he has.
All right, then. You just mentioned a little bit earlier that about Manitoba's infections and compared to Saskatchewan. Manitoba is actually the only province west of, other than Nova Scotia, with an infection rate that is still rising. Manitoba is actually now the second worst jurisdiction in Canada in the U.S. after Alberta, but Alberta's case counts are going down and our case counts are still rising. So in light of that, and it looks like in a couple of days we will probably be the worst jurisdiction in Canada and the U.S. In light of that, how well do you think we're doing?
Well, Bartley, my old dad used to say, if you didn't say anything when the service was good, you don't really have the right to complain too much when you don't like it. I'll tell you this, Manitobans delayed the onset of the third wave. You know that. You've done the cross-jurisdictional comparisons. You know we had the lowest numbers. We have the lowest numbers year to date, and of course they're worsening now. But it isn't for lack of trying on the part of the government or Manitobans. I think there have been some people that have ignored the health orders. We've stepped up our enforcement. Our enforcement is stronger than anywhere in the country. And we're continuing to do our very best in terms of addressing this issue. But again, because I've endeavored to answer this question before, but I'll try it again on you, I think that the key challenge we face now, as our numbers have risen, is that we have to get everybody vaccinated, and we have to follow the public health rules and shorten the third wave. We delayed it very well. I'm not talking government now, I'm talking Manitobans, delayed the onset of the third wave better than anybody outside the Atlantic bubble. That's a fact, but it's here now. We're addressing it. And in the coming week, I expect we'll begin to see the positive impact of some pretty severe additional restrictions we brought into play about 2 weeks ago. And we brought even more in, as you know, a few days ago. So it would be my hope that Manitobans both get vaccinated at their first opportunity and continue to follow the public health orders that we've laid out, which are strong but necessary.
Thank you very much for that.
Our final reporter this morning, Mr. Premier, from CTV Winnipeg, Jeff.
Oh, hello, gentlemen. I'm just wondering, this deal with Xplornet, does it have a cost to it for the province, or is it simply a matter of allowing the company access to the hydro towers and the fiber optic?
Go ahead, Reg.
There is no cost to Manitoba. Manitoba Hydro and Manitoba put these fiber optic cables in the ground, and that investment was made. Now we're finding a way to make sure that they're used so that Manitobans have equal access to broadband in rural and northern Manitoba.
That's a great response, Reg. And I'll just add, Jeff, if I could, that the real cost has been paid by rural and northern Manitobans for the last number of years with the lack of access to internet. And so this initiative today is to address the real cost, and the real cost has been significant for rural communities. If you talk to some of the RMs or the First Nations leadership in our province, I know they're going to tell you that they're excited about today's announcement, because what it does is it takes down one of the major barriers that has to be faced by rural and northern folks, and that is access to internet for attracting investment, for quality of life, for social services, you name it, even for travel safely. So it's an exciting announcement, and I'd say addressing this today, it's an example of a real good initiative on the part of our government to use assets that Manitobans have already had to pay for that were inactive. That's what dark fiber means. It isn't used, it's dark. And light it up, and light up the potential for rural and northern Manitobans doing it. It's exciting.
Okay, and my last question, Mr. Premier, I know it's only been 6 days since the announcement of the new public health orders, but I think there's a lot of parents here in day 2 of remote learning who want an indication from you and your government. What are the chances that school will be back for at least the month of June after the public health orders are set to expire and or renewed, I guess?
I think those opportunities are there. I'm going to say, Jeff, congratulations to Dr. Brent Rusin for being selected by his peers at Doctors Manitoba as the Physician of the Year. And I'm going to channel Dr. Rusin's advice right now. The future's in our hands. If we can get Manitobans, all Manitobans, vaccinated, the sooner the better. That helps. If we can get everybody to follow the public health orders, that helps. When we work together to stay safe, that helps. Our restrictions that we introduced 2 weeks ago moved us to being outside of Ontario's limited restrictions among the absolute most restrictive in the province. That was now 2.5 weeks ago, to be more accurate. This week we added to those. Part of that, of course, was moving to have students move to remote learning in both Winnipeg and in Brandon, Reg's hometown. These measures weren't undertaken lightly. They were undertaken out of an abundance of caution. Manitobans need to remain cautious and steadfast. We delayed the onset of the third wave, better than anybody outside the Atlantic bubble in the country. 10,000 more cases in Saskatchewan as of earlier this week compared to Manitoba, just to tell you, and they were the second best at holding off COVID in Canada. Now we have to do it again. We delayed it, but it's here and it's rising, and we can turn that curve. We did it before, we need to do it again. And so the future is in our hands. The restrictions are real. Follow them and get your vaccine as soon as you can, and tell your friends. Follow the health orders and tell your friends, get a vaccination. Thanks, everybody.